Next, and then actually, Abuna, if you can remind me the date for our Thanksgiving dinner.
November 18th.
November 18th, we have Thanksgiving dinner here at the Fellowship Hall, so please RSVP. It's on our website. There's a link. Just register so we know that you're coming. And then starting December, every Thursday, we're going to have a meeting. So it's no longer once a month. Yeah, I'm excited. And we will be incorporating Bible study. So it'll be fellowship talk one week and then Bible study the other week. Without further ado, welcome Abuna.
Sorry, I was expecting a longer song.
We can go longer.
Where
How
do
can I
you
help you? I can scoot this table.
like this?
Or that table. Yeah.
Will you help me out with this? Thanks.
Who else is going to stay there?
Yeah.
Whatever you think is better.
Please
I have no preference. I just want to
get
say.
a nice view.
I'm here on Sundays, and I look at how accounting passwords. Yeah. And I'm a girl. Yeah. Okay. So you're like Sunday.
Mobile TV.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Okay. All right. Absolve me, Abuna. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. So it's interesting how this topic came about because I was thinking about a topic and then Monica was like, Abuna, you need to tell me what you're going to talk about. And I'm like, sure, I'll get right on it. I'll tell you. I really am thinking about it and I couldn't come up with a topic. And the next day, Abuna, I need to tell people what we're going to talk about. Like, I'm really praying and I'm thinking, and trust me, I really am. I just don't know. Next day, same thing. Next day, same thing. And like a week later, she's like, Abuna. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I think God's trying to tell me something that I need to talk about not knowing or not having a sense of direction, or like when you feel stuck, you feel stagnant. And that was kind of this indirect message to me to grapple with this topic. Whenever you feel stagnant, you feel like you're stuck, and you feel like you're not getting anywhere. The fathers call it spiritual paralysis, if you want to be more of like the appropriate terminology. But instead of just talking to you about how to break through these moments or these phases, whenever you feel dry, you feel stuck, you feel like you're not getting anywhere, I want to talk to you about actually embracing that phase or that period. And I think that serves as the foundation for progressing through this this whole period whenever you feel like you're not getting anywhere. And then from there, you can get into all of the helpful tips that anyone can utilize, like going to certain passages in the scriptures, or talking to your father at confession, or certain meditations. Like all of those little tools are important to talk about and to keep in mind. But at the very foundation of that is a sense of embrace and a sense of surrender that we all have to develop. Okay? Now, Jean-Pierre de Caussade says, in souls abandoned to God, everything is profitable. Everything is a sermon and apostolic. What does that mean? That was a long pause. I had a chance to finish the whole bottle of water. I can go get another bottle if you guys. What do you think? Yes.
There's something to be learned from everything around you.
Perfect. That's exactly what it means. Anything that happens has a profit to it. It has something beneficial, something that edifies you. And in a sense, it speaks to you. Okay? So he says that it's a sermon. You know, that's obviously self-explanatory, like you know what a sermon does. A sermon speaks to you. But it's interesting that he says it's apostolic. What does apostolic mean? Or what is an apostle? If you say someone is an apostle, what does that mean he does? Okay, teaches. Kind of. But more specifically, what does the word mean? It means sent. Okay, someone who is sent is an apostle. Okay, so sent from who? Or by who? From God, right? To do what? There's a specific role in being sent, a specific task that the apostle serves. Spread the word. Apostle is always sent in a prophetic sense. Okay, and a prophet primarily reveals the will of God. Okay, the prophets had this predominant role to reveal God's will. Okay, so the apostle is sent not just to preach, but more specifically to reveal God, not just to tell you about God, but to personify God, to be a presence of God, to reveal His will by His own life, right? So that tells you a whole lot about everything that happens in your life, that it should have the capacity to do that for you. Everything in your life, every moment, should have the capacity to speak to you, to teach you, to exhort you, to admonish you, to challenge you, to comfort you if that's what God needs to give you to really edify you, or maybe it's a sense of conviction. Sometimes God wants to give us a kick in the butt, and that's what's going to profit you. But in one way or another, it's apostolic. It's a sermon, right? And it's a personal sermon, not this vague general message. Okay? Keep that in mind as we continue to progress in our understanding of this topic of really embracing or surrendering to these difficult moments, okay, whenever we feel stuck or stagnant, okay? Father Jean-Baptiste says, nothing happens in the universe without God willing and allowing it. So, I think we can all agree to the good. Like, all good comes from God. But what about the bad?
God wills and allows for us to have free will. And
Okay.
we do bad stuff sometimes.
Okay. Well, aside from like the sins that I commit, what about the bad that happens to me? Now, would you say cancer is good or bad? Bad. Okay, would you say that like getting robbed is good or bad? Bad. Like all these things that happen to you, whether by chance, whether they're just circumstantial or actual evil by someone, are those things good or bad? We say they're bad, right? But this is what I want to like reassess for a moment. Okay. In Isaiah 45, verse 6 and 7, the scriptures tell us, I am the Lord, and there is no other. I form light and create darkness. I make peace and create war. I am the Lord who do all these things. Okay? So, from God comes darkness, comes war. And in other translations it says woes or evil. Okay? If you think of how Israel was oppressed throughout their whole journey, not just from the time that they were liberated from bondage in Egypt, but after they entered the promised land and at the period of judges and kings, you have these periods of captivity, right? And of course, these people were oppressing them, right? How do we understand like God's role in all of this? He just kind of like opened the door for the Assyrians or the Babylonians to come and oppress the people? Or is there more to it? What do we make of something as oppressive as like the Babylonian captivity or the Assyrian captivity and like all of these events? People had no freedom.
It's for his glory.
Okay? So what role does he have in the whole process happening? Do you feel like he's more passive or active?
Active.
Active. You guys agree? Good. You should agree because we see God's hand behind every part of our life, even in some of these darker times. Okay? And that's the hard part to really digest. Right? Again, going back to Isaiah, but a little bit earlier in chapter 10, verse 5 and 6, he says, Ah, Assyria, the rod of my anger. He's talking about the Assyrians who oppressed the people. The rod of my anger, the staff of my fury. So he says the Assyrians are his staff. Okay? Against a godless nation, I sent him. Against a godless I sent him. I sent Assyria. And against the people of my wrath, I command him to take spoil and to seize plunder, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. These are the heavy words, right? But it goes to show how God is working in a mystical way, in a hidden way, throughout these darker moments when I feel like I'm not making progress in my spiritual life, or I feel like I can't settle this problem with a friend, or I feel like my situation at work is not getting better, or I feel like my health is just deteriorating and getting worse, or a problem with a family member, and like you name it. I think we could all put a pretty big list together of real life struggles that really weigh us down, right? And could tear us apart. Like sometimes we're in tears, like the mental and psychological anguish of like our mental health always suffers from all of these issues, not just physically, but like all of that anxiety from all of these conflicts. God is behind it. And again, it's a big deal. It's not just a casual thing to say. I think the best way to really explain this is how St. Gregory describes it, which is like how a doctor uses a leech. Okay? What is the intention of a leech whenever it's on an animal or any creature? To feed. Like, it's like to feed nicely, there's to take its portion and like, kind of leave the rest untouched. No, it's like, I'm going to devour you. It's a parasite, right? Okay, now, a lot of times we want to distinguish between, well, God, allows things or he permits things, but he doesn't really cause them. His hand isn't like directly doing this or that. And I feel like there's a real problem, or like we really complicate the way God deals with us whenever we stress this distinction. Like we look at God's will in like his permissive will and his intentional will. Right? I'm sure you've heard talks about this, and people look at different commentary on it, which complicates the whole process. Okay? Does the doctor just like open the lid of the leeches and says, look, I permit you to go, and it's up to you if you want to go to this guy's arm or this guy's leg or his back or whatever? Does he just permit the leech to do its thing? Or is there intentionality behind it? So he's intentionally putting something harmful. So I think, again, it goes to show God's providence and his wisdom behind his work. Because if it's intentional, it's not this haphazard thing, it goes to show how there is a real reason, right? And the patient might not know, doesn't understand why the doctor is putting the leech here or there, right? But to say that God causes as much as he permits actually speaks to his goodness and his wisdom much more. Right? Even what we call evil. This doesn't apply to our sins, because that comes from our own will. But if somebody sins by cursing, and that derogatory comment is intended for me, God sent that to me to humble me. He didn't cause the person to sin, right? Just like he's not responsible for the evil intent of the leech, but he directed it to me because he knew this would do me good. So, pause and take some questions. Any of your comments? Yes.
But why would God do that? Like, why would he want you to, like, experience something bad?
Well, it goes back to what we define as bad.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say, like the example I used, like cancer, would you say that's bad?
Yeah, because it like kills.
I've seen people that are glad for their cancer, and would rather have not traded it for anything else in the world. Because out of that big kick in the butt, they changed their heart, became more grateful, found a greater joy and a greater peace that they actually didn't have prior to the cancer. This is a first-hand experience that I've seen with people. I've taken confessions of people days before they die, after these terminal diseases. And this is what they tell me. In our eyes, of course it's bad. It's like a leech, something evil. Like failing a test, or any sort of mistake that happens where we're offended by an insult or whatever. These things may be bad, but I think a lot of us can look back in our life and recognize so many struggles that seemed awful, but after we walk through the fire, we feel a little stronger. We're glad that they built our character. And of course, there are things that don't leave us any better than the way we were. But what really matters is what we make of it. And that's what I really want to stress. I think good and bad is relative. Like Saint Therese says, everything is grace. Everything is grace. Like, because I choose to accept it as a gift from God. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah, but doesn't St. John Chrysostom say something to the effect of like, like no man can hurt, something like,
No man can hurt the one who does not hurt himself.
right, something, yeah.
You're
I
right.
feel like that's kind of what you're getting at, like, things happen, we're the ones who decide whether they're good or bad, right?
Exactly. And it's not this like sort of like psychological gymnastics where you have to manipulate your mindset. And it's really just understanding God's love and taking a leap of faith. Okay, and you see that in the saints. I think it doesn't become tangible unless you see it in the saints. And when you do that, you realize how, wait, like this person just got robbed, and he's still full of gratitude. He actually feels more indebted to God because the person who took something didn't take more than the one or two things that they stole. I was just at a person's house a few weeks ago, and their whole house got robbed, and they were full of gratitude, and they were shook up, of course, but they were grateful that God kept them safe, and whatever happened passed in safety. And they recognize how their gratitude is more valuable at that time than the day before. Right? So that makes your situation even more precious. Right? Because imagine that what you offer to God doesn't have the same value on a daily basis. Like, let's say you offer $10 to God today, and then a year from now you offer $10 to God. Are they worth the same to God? Are they worth the same? Come on. Like maybe, but chances are they're not. Why? Because at a year from now, you're either going to be richer or poorer. Right? And in your poverty, when you offer the same amount, it's a greater sacrifice of love. Right? So they felt closer to God, and they felt the grace of God in offering their gratitude at a time of brokenness. Right? And that's how we are too. Like, your faithfulness in the times of dryness is more valuable than your faithfulness in the times of zeal. It really is. And oh man, when you pray whenever you're tired, when you pray whenever you're stuck, when there are no emotions, nothing is more powerful. Nothing. You might not notice at the time, but that's the truth. Jean-Pierre de Caussade said, there's not a moment in which God doesn't present himself under the cover of some pain to be endured, or some consolation to be enjoyed, or some duty to be performed. All that takes place within us, around us, or through us contains and conceals his divine action. So it does require a real matter of faith. There are no coincidences in Christ. Things don't just happen haphazardly. And I'm not saying God has the world like a puppeteer on puppet strings, but there is wisdom in the way he directs our life. And when we live with that thought in mind, we find meaning in everything. Now imagine if every moment of your life really had meaning, even the quote-unquote bad ones. Then God becomes more tangible. God's within reach. This is exactly what happened in Job's life. Okay? What did Job say whenever he lost everything? Who did he point to as the reason? God gave and God takes, right? Not God gave and the devil took away, or my unfortunate luck, that I lost my house and my health and my children. Look at how St. Augustine puts it. Job doesn't say the Lord gave and the devil has taken away, but says, wise that he is, the Lord gave me my children and my possessions, and it is he who has taken them away. It has been done as it has pleased the Lord. And so this is where we strive to be, right? So that in the dark times of our life, again, when we feel stuck, whenever we don't have that sort of zeal, we all want zeal. I'm not saying like just be Eeyore all day and say like, I'm going to embrace this and that's how I want to live my life. Like, we want to have energy and continue to love and have that sort of spiritual zeal that keeps us on fire. But if we don't embrace the darkness and those slumps, then we miss some of the most powerful moments when God comes to visit us. Okay?
I have a question. Do you have though, because Job was like a very extreme situation, like a very extreme example, and obviously he's a great saint that it's not totally realistic to our everyday lives that we're gonna react in this way. So what about for how do we deal with that in a more I guess practical
Hmm.
like when things happen to us that, you know.
So I can just tell you from my own personal life, because I'm certainly no Job. I got into grad school by like some miracle. Okay, did I tell you the story of me getting into school and my struggles at school? So I went to physical therapy school. Okay, and I applied to like 30 schools because my grades weren't all that. Like I had good grades, but I wasn't a 4.0 GPA student or whatever. And people were telling me, you know, like just apply to the schools in Florida because they're easier to get into. Okay. So I did that. I applied to the University of Miami and another school in Florida. Just waited for all of my results to come back. I was getting rejected from schools that were not even ranked. They didn't have rankings in schools. Schools were not even ranked. End up getting an interview at a school in Florida, and that was the last school to respond to. And I got rejected from every single school. Okay. So, okay, let's see what happens. I'm just skipping through a lot of details to get to the main point, but I end up going, and it's funny because he points to my first grade that he sees on my paper was, on my transcript, was an F, which was ironically in yoga. He's like, can you explain this? Like, I was worried that he was going to call me out on not having the GPA to even apply and the GRE scores to even apply to the school, let alone to be a competitive candidate. So like I could handle the yoga grade. Anyways, we go through the interview. The guy seems to like me. I'm like, okay, whatever. I will see what happens. To make a long story short, a couple of days later, I get an acceptance letter. Okay, and I'm spinning, happy, jumping up and down, whatever. So I look at the school that I just got into because, like, again, I just applied to a bunch of random schools that I felt like would be easier to get into. Turns out the University of Miami was ranked 7th in the nation. It's the only school that I got accepted to. I got rejected from schools that were not even ranked out of 30 schools. Okay? I'm still setting the stage for your answer. First semester in school, I went in so hard, like, okay, I'm gonna prove myself, I belong here, and I'm gonna, do my work. I studied hard. I was like tutoring all of my friends in anatomy and everything, and the way the class is organized, there's only one class in the first semester. So the way the semester is organized, like there's this one class and there are 3 tests in the class, and if you fail 2 of the 3 exams, you fail the course, and if you fail the course, you fail the semester, you're out of the program. Okay, you can't redo semesters. And a C is a fail, right? So I'm like tutoring half of the class. I know the material at the back of my hand. I take the exam. I don't know what happened, if I just got flustered or whatever, but I get my exam back and ends up being a 75%. So I can't explain to you like how hard my heart dropped. You can imagine all the work that I did going through the application process, the interviews and the statements and like preparing to actually move to Miami and studying like day and night for this exam. And you know how our Coptic culture is, so like when I tell people that I'm gonna be getting my doctorate in physical therapy, like it's a big deal, so everybody's got this like high bar that like they're waiting for me to finish school and come back, like make my family proud, and you know, I just failed this exam. And if I fail another exam, I'm done. Like, I am in tears, I am angry, and I'm totally depressed because like how much harder could I have studied? Like I was studying enough. The people that I tutored aced the exam. I'm not kidding you. So I go home and like I don't feel like talking to anyone. I don't feel like even looking towards God, but I drag myself to my little prayer corner and somehow I just grabbed my Agpeya and I opened my Agpeya to Psalm 42, I think, where it says, "Vindicate me, O Lord, and plead my cause." And it's just like 4 or 5 verses. But in the middle, it says, "Why are you sad, O my soul? And why are you so disturbed within me? Put your trust in him, for he is your Savior and your Lord." I just like broke down. I was like, okay, I get it. And that moment of like real anxiety, like I think mental stress and anxiety is worse than physical pain. And like I'm telling you, like I've endured some serious physical pain in my life, but like, whenever you're anxious, like you know how awful that is. And from that, I felt like I learned the most valuable lesson in my life. And I just took it as a message from God, continued to study for my next exam. But as hard as I studied, I didn't study with the same dependence on like my own intelligence like I did the first exam. Except I felt like, you know, I belong here. Like, you know, I got myself, I'm like, who am I kidding? I didn't get myself here. I don't belong here. God brought me here and I should be depending on him, and it was foolish for me to even think otherwise. So, in a sense, I embraced my limitation. I embraced the fact that I got a handout to be where I'm here. A lot of times we're too proud to take handouts. I know, like, I like to earn what I have. You know, like, if you just give handouts to people, especially in our culture, like, you know, the Egyptian men that, like, they don't like to take free things, you know, like to take pride in having earned something. I'm like that, you know, and so I had to embrace the grace and to take that humble step and to say, okay, I'll take this like punch in the face as a message, and I could have made of it whatever like I decided at that point. I could have made of it that like God is a terrible God, or I could have taken it out on other people. I could have taken it out on my teachers. And a lot of times when we're upset, like our frustrations are always misdirected, right? What we need to do is to admit our limitations and in a sense embrace it, acknowledge it, and to say, yeah, I can't, God, but you can. And it reminds us of the paralytic at the pool when Christ asks him, do you want to be made well? I have no man. And he just admits to him, like, I wish, I need someone. I have nobody to take me down. So it's a humble cry to say, had there been somebody to help me, like, I'll take the handout. I need somebody to help me. And so we need to have that mindset in all of these situations in our life. And it doesn't mean it's going to change overnight, and it doesn't mean the pain will disappear and you'll have a sense of direction all of a sudden. You'll still be walking through darkness through so many situations in life, but you'll walk through it with God's presence. I hope that answers your question. All right. Remember how Job benefited in the end of this whole process, even though he hated his life. And sure, this is the good side of Job. You see how he responded in this true manner, like, yes, it's God. But you know what? This didn't even help Job. Actually, the fact that God was behind it is precisely what bothered him. It would have been better for him to just become atheist, because he wasn't bitter at the fact that, he lost all of his possessions, but that the God who does exist was behind his losses. And so his temptation wasn't necessarily to stick with this thought of whether God exists or not, but rather it was to stick with the thought of whether God is love or not. Because yes, I know God exists. That's not what's like making my head spin. I know he exists, so if he does, and I know he does, why is he letting what's happening happen? And Job couldn't come to terms with that. So if you read Job, he's constantly cursing his life. I wish I'd never been born. Take my life from me. I don't want to live. Like, he wants to die like every chapter. It's 42 chapters. The first 2 chapters are basically setting the stage for how his life falls apart. And the last 2 or 3 chapters is God putting him in his place, and then he repents in the last couple of verses. The first, couple and last couple, set that off to the side, and you have 38 chapters of just Job bitter at life. There's Job in a nutshell. Right? And so, what do we learn from that? We learn that the real struggle is not to hold on to the idea of God's existence. The real struggle is to hold on to the idea of God's love. I know you exist. Why is this happening? I know you're omnipotent. What's beyond your reach? What's beyond your power? What can't you intervene with and change? By a word, you created the heavens and the earth. So why are you letting this happen to me? And we grapple with the why, right? And then where does it take us? Nowhere. For those 37, 38 chapters, Job was just spinning in place, adding to his bitterness. Father Jacques Philippe says, the worst suffering is the suffering we refuse to accept. So you compare all different sufferings out there, it's not necessarily the one that's a greater magnitude, like a bigger sickness or whatever, but it's the sickness that you refuse to accept is the one that you won't embrace. So by virtue of your rejection, it becomes more burdensome. Does that make sense? And it wasn't until God put him in his place that Job realized, okay, wait, I don't know anything. I'm nothing. And God says, where were you when I put the stars in their orbits and the planets and separated the sea from the land and I created the gazelle and Job's like, okay, I get it. And he repented in dust and ashes. The one that God said is blameless in all his ways at the very beginning of the book is the same one who repents at the end. It's a lot. I'm going to stop here because I want to give you a chance to work through this little workshop. I have another 10-15 minutes, but I'm stopping for my sake, not yours. So that's a little selfish, and I do apologize. But I have another meeting at 8:30, and I want to give you a chance to do these workshops. All right, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so I have 8 little topics that tie into this concept. Okay? And I guess we can have like 3 or 4 couples and the rest single individuals that take these topics, and then I want you to read them just like a paragraph, and then we can, reconvene in like 10-15 minutes and talk about it. Do you have a chat or something that you can send this to people? Like I have a little PDF. Or if you guys have your AirDrop on, I can just AirDrop it to everybody.
Do you want to let me put it on this?
It'll be like 10 pages, and each one is going to take, like, there's a paragraph on the top of each page. Each one's going to take a page. Okay. Do you have a chat or AirDrop it to everyone?
A chat.
Okay, I'll AirDrop it to everybody. So everybody turn your AirDrops on.